Let's go ahead and finish ourselves out here with Sid and the technology stack group talking about supply chain digitalization, not digitization. So do we at least get past the difference between those, or are we still kind of, even that's pretty tricky?
I think it was a very, very passionate group. So we were fortunate to have an owner, a sub, a GC, technology, all in one group. And we talked about who has the weight of controlling the data or owning the data. And everybody said, these are my pain. My pain is there's too many bleeding technology out there and they're not talking to each other. Somebody said, owners are different animals. We are looking data at facilities perspective, not as project by project. The world is seeing out differently. How do you have collected better data? How do you solve that? And great idea. There was an integration example that the software companies are doing their best at trying to build connectors so that the cost of integration is reduced. It's no longer a six-figure, connecting every app so that never gets approved. We want to give them technology. We want to give them information. Once they're hooked up to something saves them time, saves them efficiency, that can increase the quality of the data. We talked about, also who should own the product data in the end. I was expecting that owner would say, yes, I should own the data, but they said, no, I don't need to own everything. I don't care about, there was an example of copper pipe. I don't care who's building it. I just need to know high-level asset information, let the subs and GC, they can own that data and they can figure out what is more effective or cost efficient for them to do it. So many takeaways for me personally, and it was a very passionate group. So I loved moderating the session. Thank you all. All right, let's get this started. Hi guys, my name is Sid Shah. I'm representing OnIndus. I'm the president. We are a boutique consulting company focusing on owners. And it's my honor to be here today to moderating this session with Craig, Amanda, and Greg. Today on this tech stack session, we'll be talking about digitization to digitalization of supply chain. And it's a passion of me working with owners to see how the data flows from the subs to GCs to construction, capital, and facility. It's an unsolved problem from my perspective, and I'm looking forward to talking to you and learning from you today. So today, what we hope in this session, we'll be talking about two different use cases. We're talking about digitization and digitalization. So I want to first talk to Amanda. Amanda is representing from NECA, as you all know. Amanda, can you explain, people who are not familiar with Electra International, what is it and how does it relate to NECA? What types of reports you publish?
Yeah, absolutely. So Electra International is the research arm of NECA. It's our 501c3 component. And our entire mission is to fund and conduct research for the entire industry. And the biggest benefit of it is all of our research is free. So we have union contractors, non-union, third parties, universities, everyone who wants to download our reports, you can. And you just go on electri.org. And some of the reports that we publish are, anything from looking at costs with prefab, looking at retaining the best and brightest, looking at aptitude and attitude assessments, looking at, in fact, Nathan Wood did a CDX project. So we have everything you can possibly think of.
Thank you, Amanda. And those of you who don't know, this is that website she was talking about. A lot of good content. My favorite over it is system integration and the RFI interchangeable research study. That's one of my favorite there. Moving on to the next, we want to welcome Dr. Craig Dubler. PhD from Maryland College, right? Why don't you introduce yourself and tell us about your perspective about experience from construction to operations data handover?
Yeah, thanks, Sid. So I'm Craig Dubler, Associate Director of Facilities from the College of Engineering at Penn State. And you know, my experience related to data turnover is I developed a BIM planning guide, you know, out of Penn State University, and just extremely similar to Sid, very passionate about how information is handed over from design to construction, specifically into operations. And I feel like we lose so much interoperability within our industry. So happy to talk about today and excited to meet some new people. Thanks, Sid.
Thank you. And this topic has become a brainchild that began with our final spotlight, Greg. Greg, why don't you introduce to the group?
Hey everyone, I'm Greg. I'm head of product at DADO. We're like a search engine for your construction documents. And yeah, I don't know about brainchild. I think I've had some cool opportunities to talk with people about different issues that I think we all face in construction. And one of them I talked about with Nathan was this digitization versus digitalization, and it seemed pretty relevant given COVID, because I think all of us can probably say that we've been pushed into certain digital strategies quicker than we might have wanted from before, and there are probably pros and cons to that. And I think that's what our topic is today, is talk about at the lowest level, you know, you're just moving from analog to digital. You know, for us, like people in the field having paper documents, paper binders of submittals, to having those digitally, to digitalization, meaning you make these operational changes to employ these digital technologies, and then digital transformation, actually making valuable changes to your customer. So like, you know, laser scanning is, you make a change to, like, you actually adopt the technology and involve it in your processes, and then once it actually helps the customer, that would be like a digital transformation.
Thank you, Greg. So let's go around the table and have everybody introduce. So I want everybody to talk about who are you with, where are you from, what do you do, and why you're here. We have Nate, you want to go next?
Yeah, thanks, Sid. Nate Tockerman. I am a former industry pro. I used to work for Rosen and Electric out of the San Francisco Bay Area. I was a PM for them for 11 plus years. I now work for Procore in partner managing, really taking our marketplace to market. Working with Sid, asked me to come on and help lend a perspective to the discussion. So a privilege and honor to be here. Thanks for the invite. Right. And I'll go over to my buddy Andrew next. Popcorn Andrew Hendricks.
Thanks, Nate. My name is Andrew Hendricks. Currently, I work for Northrop Grumman in the defense and safety sector. I worked with Nate for roughly 12 years with Rosen as a purchasing agent. Nate and I worked on the Apple campus before we both parted ways. But I'm very much working with a bunch of young startups in the material management space as a contractor, and looking to jump back into the tech contracting space. So thanks for having me here.
Emily?
Hi, my name is Emily Hubbard, and I am Greg's colleague at DADO. I'm our strategic development manager. So I'm here really to learn more about the topic because it's so relevant to the work that we do at DADO. So thanks, everyone.
Jonathan?
I am Jonathan Marsh. I'm with Steel Toe Consulting, and I help contractors bring technology to their business. And I was a CTO for Spader, mechanical engineer out of, or mechanical contractor out of Erie, Pennsylvania for a long time. And now I'm very much interested in digitization and doing a lot with clients that are at a whole host of points in the spectrum of digitizing their business.
Wonderful. Nice to meet you. Aditi, if you're here.
Hi, Hi, I'm Aditi Patel. I'm Deputy Director for the VDCO group for the Leo Group. It's a almost 1,000 people strong construction management firm based out of New York. We focus a lot on digitization, and currently we're working on one of the largest infrastructure projects called Inside Access, managing BIM and VDCO implementation effort, helping the CM team and also the contractors just moderate the project construction and track the progress using tools. Also introduce them to new technology related to reality capture, progress tracking, data analytics, how to link the model and data with the Power BI, and also custom software solutions supporting the BIM effort. So I thought this topic was really interesting, and I wanted to just like stay in the background, hear what other industry experts have to share with us. So nice to meet you all.
Wonderful. Daniel?
Yeah, my name's Dan Esparza, and I'm a principal of TG Top Down, and we're a vertically integrated builder of top-down technology, and just here to participate in Construct Tech. We do a vertically integrated supply chain on developing some of our own software.
Wonderful. David?
So I'm David Basigi. I'm the CEO of PipeServer. We provide a digital link between the CAD and BIM tools in the design office and the pipe cutters and other tools on the shop floor. Try and get those older school tools, fully integrated with the digital workflow.
Nice. Darren?
Darren Young, Director of Construction Technology at University Mechanical Contractors up in Seattle, actually a customer of David's. And one of their integrations actually saves us about $50,000 of labor annually. But we're a mechanical contractor, plumbing, piping, sheet metal. My background is actually more on the manufacturing side, maybe over a decade old. So I come to this industry very frustrated at the lack of supply chain that was much more common in manufacturing.
Thank you. Elijah Thompson's, I hope I pronounced it right.
I'm Elijah Thompson, and I'm a construction technologist for Steel Toe Consulting. So I'm very new to the construction industry. I just graduated Penn State with a mechanical engineering degree, so I'm just trying to learn a lot more about the industry.
Welcome aboard. George?
Good afternoon. My name is George Dial. I'm the CIO for a design build firm, the Neenan Company in Fort Collins, Colorado. And I was suggested to attend and check out your group by one of our superintendents. So I'm here just to kind of check in and observe and learn a little bit about the group. Thank you.
Hugh?
Inevitably on mute. So I'm Hugh Seaton. I'm head of product for CSI's Crosswalk product that connects master format to all of your amazing software.
Beautiful. What do we have next? Jackson?
Hi, my name is Jackson Sensat. I work with applied software, but before that, I worked on the project management side for a mechanical contractor in Austin, Texas. Went on to apply to do technical consulting, but now I've transitioned over to a customer success role. So just trying to learn a little bit more about the other technology within the industry.
Wonderful. John?
Hey guys, John Chester, my company is Jovix. We provide a materials management and drill tracking software for construction industries. We've been doing about 13 years. And so we do a lot with suppliers upstream as far as tagging and tracking that material from their locations to the job site. So very interested in the topic.
Wonderful. Kyla?
wow, a year of using Zoom and I still can't use it. My name is Kyla Natali. I'm on the marketing team with Newforma. Nathan Wood actually suggested this one because this is pretty relevant to what we're doing on the interoperability side. So before this, I worked at a fintech company. So construction is still relatively new, but I've been with Newforma for about 3.5 years.
Great. Lillian?
Hi, good morning, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Liliana Magallanes. I'm a technology project manager for DPR construction. So really the core of what I do is just really try to help the company align our technology use, not only at the national level, but also throughout the projects. Been in the industry for, oh my gosh, I have to count now, over 10 years now, especially in the, mostly around working for public fund projects. Also work for an architect as well. And now I work for a DC company. I went to the dark side.
Wonderful.
Most people would say.
So today's, we're going to discuss about how we can separate the pains of digitization from the gains of digitalization. In what ways we can verify, what tools or what techniques you guys have developed to verify the accuracy of the data, so that when the final product, be the electrical report or a final as built, is done right, so that the final user can get access to data. With that said, Amanda, with your use case perspective, as you read this statement, digitizing electric report, what do you think the pains are of digitization, all the research work that goes behind building the report, so that the end user, who is, could be on the industry representative, how would they can gain the gains from this in your scenario?
Well, I think just looking at the history of it, to start back at the digitization part of it, we used to literally have physical reports, and if people ordered them, we would mail them. And we finally got to the point where we put them all, scan them all into PDFs, and now we don't even put them into a physical report. All researchers give them to us in digital format. But it's taking it to that next step of digitalization. And for us, one of the best key partners we're using right now is DADO, which is awesome. But it's all about making your data work for you, basically. That's the way I see it. So when you get a report, I look at how do people search. So that's a big one. And then the other aspect is, the search function itself. And for us, I think that the way people search is extremely important. So for instance, like if we get a report that's productivity of workforce, people like 3 years ago, me, who had no idea what construction was, would have searched productivity or construction. But for a lot of our contractors, they're interested in absenteeism or attendance tracking. That's synonymous with that. So we noticed when we tag reports, trying to get to that next step of like making search functions optimal, is the metadata, like data about the data. We go behind and put tags, but we having to put different tags for how people actually search. And then throwing things into data, you actually can then search the entire document. And then to me, that next step too is then like relationships. So if you search this report, you're most likely to then want these reports. But that's the way I see it in terms of electric reports going through the system.
So you said before digitization, you used to get reports. Now it's mailed to you. And now what's your process? Like which format, if you had a magic wand, what format would you want to get it received?
Well, they used to be mailed out, but now we get them in, like some give us Word documents, which really easy to just hit convert to PDF. A lot of researchers could give it to us already in PDF, and then of course throwing it into DADO. All those algorithms are magical behind that, which makes the OCR function amazing.
Okay, And then the last one, what is it? Who should own the quality or set the parameters of the standards for research? Is it the recipient who is reviewing and getting the value of the report, or is it you who are in the middle who's kind of collecting the research, or is the person who's sending the data?
It's a hard one. It's a little bit of all of them, and I think that's one of the biggest issues that we'll probably hit on later. But it's like that communication aspect of all of this and standardizing, because everyone's version, especially in construction, I noticed we're all snowflakes. Like we all love the way we do things, so it's really hard to standardize. But I think that for us, like the people who receive it, it's really important to make the accepting of the reports very clear, and that's something we're working on to get better and better on. But in terms of like, the data aspect and like how other construction professionals would read it, we need to incorporate more people in the construction industry to read those reports, because the people we have are reading them are people who are purely like grammar. People like me who's not an expert in a lot of that stuff. So it's almost like we need to get more of an SME looking at it to say, hey, you need to change this, or can you tweak it because this is more of an industry accepted standard.
It's hard, yeah. Turning over to Craig. Craig, oops. Where do you see that the greatest amount of wastage in your system, finding the data, translating the data from a facilities management perspective?
Yeah, I guess, either people or process waste is kind of what I look at. But, my area of expertise is, asset management from an owner perspective. So when I think of waste, I look at when our technician goes out and actually tries to maintain a part and a piece, or let's just say an equipment, piece at Penn State, and just doesn't have the information available, which me coming from the design and construction industry, I know that they exist, right? So they have to make decisions based off of inaccurate or unavailable data and documents. And it's very frustrating to see, and it's frustrating to hear, because I know construction's an industry I love, and I know the knowledge is available, and just not seeing that handed over appropriately is frustrating. However, Penn State's gone a long way, and to straighten that curve, which is filling in the gaps and getting down to supply chain of, the subcontractor suppliers, and attempting to pull the data into our facilities management system. It's not perfect, but there's still a lot of roadblocks, but we're going down that path.
Over to Greg. Greg, from a software development perspective and user experience, what have you seen as the greatest digitization pain facing this industry? What technology exists today, that can solve Amanda's or Greg's pain points?
Yeah, I can just give it from my perspective and what I've seen with customers. But I think there are two things that I've noticed. One is like people talk about technologies like ML, AI, etc. I feel like they're really much simpler technologies that are more so the pains, like just integrations. Like if you read like the contact report for the past like 4 years, you'll basically see that people are using 3, 5, 6 applications a day because the apps don't integrate data together. And so that's like part of the first out of the two things. The first thing is there's just no way to connect the data at the simplest like API level, or we're not putting in the effort to do so. And then the other thing, I know there are some comments about, what is digitization versus digitalization. You could effectively just think of it as digitalization is about operations, like operationally incorporating the technology in your company. I say a big issue is just the top-down approach not having top-down leadership to do it, because I think sometimes in construction what we've seen you're kind of in proof of concept land, and you go project, just testing out these technologies, and sometimes you kind of need people from the top to really operationally move it across the company to really get that benefit from it, or else you're just kind of having these one-off projects, and then if you're not integrated with the rest of the company or other partners on your project, then the benefit of digitalization is kind of limited.
So the question to the group, if all these tools and technology exist today for digitalization, why aren't we changing? Why are we not leveraging it to the full potential? Why? Let's go around the table and raise your hand and let's dig in.
Sid, I'll go first there. So sitting at Procore, seeing a lot of different technology partners come up, but also listening to a lot of contractors, NECA members, whatever it is. What I'm seeing is it's hard to identify best-in-class solutions, and best-in-class solutions that actually do integrate together. To Greg's point, right? So these are all great, but do they talk? And do I have the ability to actually operationalize that data, to do this digitalization process, because my disparate solutions are all working together? And right now, I think that there's a sense that, hey, we've taken our at-bats or tried with cutting or bleeding edge technology, and then it hasn't had market adoption, and then it dies out. And so there's sort of this once bitten, twice shy approach of, hey, I'd like to try again, but I kind of want to wait for it not to be bleeding edge, right? So everyone, I think, is open to cutting edge as long as it kind of is as built, as delivered. And I think we're sort of at a precipice of getting those big logo companies to emerge and say, hey, look, we're going to be here, we're going to gather market share, and then we're going to build these integrations to not break down silo data, but connect them. So I fully agree with what Greg is saying, but that's sort of what I'm seeing. I'd love to hear from some of the folks in the group, Daniel especially, in the industry and in running your business. How do you respond to that? Is that, do you agree, or is it pretty clear who the best in class are to you?
Yeah, I mean, and that's been kind of the complicated issue, I think, globally, is why aren't these systems talking? Why aren't they working kind of holistically? And that's kind of and we've had a number of conversations with some of the majors, Oracle and all of the best in class, the major brands, the major names. Fundamentally, we look at it as all of these systems come down to ones and zeros, right? I mean, it's just data. It's just ones and zeros. And so from a computer science perspective, all of these systems should work because it's just data. So from a functionality perspective, systems should work. From a computer science perspective, the systems work, but why don't they? So, I've kind of come to the conclusion is the reason they don't work because we have lawyers. That's why they don't work.
I would love to jump in here. Sorry, I would love to jump in here on this one. I do agree with Nathan. I agree with you, Nathan, but I think there's also, like, to separate the two, there's like the architecture of like the technology, right? Like how we're collecting data and all that. But then there's also the architecture of like how we're interacting with this technology as well, like the user interface or how easy it is to adopt and scale versus the background of how this technology, and I'm just going to keep that very generic, of how that's, how that's built. It's very separate. And I've also just seen, I would also just like to add in there, there's the added cost. There's some tech out there that is really great, but then there's another cost that we have to think about as an owner, like, oh, do I have money in my budget for another, piece of technology? Is this technology, in a sense, confusing everyone? Is it adding more work, duplicating efforts versus reducing those steps, as well as subtracting tech on my side as managing, several pieces of technology? So those are the things I think about when it comes to that.
Yeah, I know, and I agree, but I think that there's different issues there, right? Because there's the user issue, there's the UI UX process, right? That's the
Right, yeah.
launch, the
Mhm.
process of how do you get adoption from the user side. So all of the businesses that we push it out to companies, and there's the UI UX. So how do companies engage the software? But then there's the production side, the design side. How does the software actually function between, we can talk about open API and whether or not it functions efficiently between platforms. And I think fundamentally there's a big issue there as it relates to, function. So there's an adoption rate, which I think is critical to the process, but then there's just an actual process about how does we as an industry, and I think this group collectively, I think is trying to answer some of those questions, right? How does software, and specifically in construction, be available to the market that is functionally efficient? And how do we get there? And right now, I don't think there's really an answer. And I think that's part of the problem is we're not providing solution-based systems that actually meet the user's intent and the user's process. Because what ends up happening, we're also getting into a generation of users now, which I think is good. Finally, I've been in this industry a long time. We're getting into a generation that expects the Uber experience in tech.
If I might add on.
Greg, you have a hand. Sorry, go ahead. After Greg, you after.
Oh, sorry about that. Okay. So just to build on what Daniel said, I think there's an expectation in construction, though, that isn't true elsewhere, in that everyone has an IT department because competing companies don't make things that work with each other. And if you want best in breed, you're going to have to do some integration. And that's true across the economy. So I think we need to get better at connecting and so on. But, there's going to be a cost of adopting technologies where you have to do some of the integration yourself, at least if you want to have separate best of breed solutions, because, Procore has done, I think, something pretty awesome with their marketplace, but they're not going to sit down. They legally can't sit down with Autodesk and Oracle and say, okay, guys, let's figure this out. Let's make it all work. I mean, really, there's a reality that even if they wanted to, there's an antitrust thing, but they really don't want to, because the point of a Procore and everybody else is to, compete for as much of the market as you can. And some of that means not necessarily, smoothly passing data back and forth, because data is customer captivity, whether you want to call it that or not.
Greg?
Yeah, Hugh said it great. I can add a few things, but that's what I was going to talk about was, where I see software fail is when they go after too much of the market and lose their identity, as a software. They go after additional services, and us as owners, we want everything to be one system, and integrate, but ultimately it's okay if they're in multiple systems if we can find it. I'm okay with being on an iPad and opening up 3 different systems, looking for 3 different informations if I can find it, if I know how to access it. Too much we try to integrate and go too far, where, and there's ways around those, even if a software has its own identity. And I guess my comment was going to be on why, projects fail, right? And please keep in mind, my background, is in facilities, so I'm talking from an owner's perspective. But where we see projects fail is when project teams are too company centric, right? And then how we see handover fail is when project teams are too project centric as opposed to facility centric. So, you have to understand that owners may have multiple facilities, and you might give us, turn over a ton of data, and it's great, but if it's not organized correct, the way owners want it, if it's not, in a fashion that owners, need to use it, it's going to be wasted information. And you might do a great job on your project, but that owner might have 40, 50 different buildings, but the multi-facility owner that doesn't meet that standard, or even isn't even close to where that is at, you know, and ultimately it just falls apart if they can't maintain it. So just wanted to make that point as well too.
Jonathan, if you're speaking, we can't hear you.
One of the few times I muted myself, I can't believe it. No, I had kind of a follow-up and almost a question for that, because certainly when technology gets walked away from, when it gets siloed on a specific project, often because it hasn't met a threshold where enough people know how to use it to make it maintain. As soon as you hit that certain threshold of use, now it's going to maintain throughout the project and probably is going to start sort of going virally out through your organization. But I think in construction, one of the problems that we run into is when someone says best-in-class solution, for who? Because if I'm building a hospital, it's significantly different than building an oil refinery or a stadium or an elementary school. And we kind of lump all these things together and say they're construction and we can have a single best-in-class solution. And I don't think that's the case. I actually have been really happy with all the companies that are putting out micro solutions, where they're saying, okay, we're going to try to give you a similar user experience so that you can feel like you're using the same program, but we're not actually going to try to own the whole market. And I agree, owning the whole market is tough. And I know that people are getting sort of cloud cuffed, where their data is stuck in one, platform, and now they're kind of stuck with that moving forward. But I think one of the bigger problems we're dealing with is we're saying that construction as a whole is like one entity, and it's I don't know that I can buy that. I think that in working with all the different things and sort of customers that I've dealt with and the stuff I've built, it's all been very different. I have customers on the refinery side, and when I was designing refineries, using an entirely different platform for that. And it's really good than designing commercial spaces or high purity or whatever else. And so I think that until we as a community kind of say, yeah, best in class, but not in every scope, we won't do good. I don't think we do a great job overall in construction at telling software providers what jobs we want done and how we want them done, so that they can say whether they're a good solution for us or not, because best in class for you and best in class for me are probably two different pieces of software.
I love that. Two things. Lillian brought up a good point about budget and consolidation, tech stack, and all that. And just throw a stat out there: construction's a laggard in technology spending at about 0.5% on average compared to a 4% average in other industries. And I think a lot of that is just not knowing what those options are, not having that, clear. Jonathan, to your point, I think of it like twofold. One, construction companies don't endeavor to do everything under one roof, right? We specialize. We have CSIs. Everyone does their trade. Tech's a little the same in that, if you've ever tried to buy a house, maybe first-time homeowner, and you have to talk to a broker and then a CPA and a tax guy, and there's really no umbrella professional to say, like, here, let me pull all of those data points in, advise you on what the best course of action is. Should you be doing an FHA? Should you be doing gift of equities from families? Like, no one's giving you that. So you go through these learnings. And I think a lot of companies are in the same boat. And so for somebody to step forward and say, Amanda at NECA saying, hey, look, we can give you some consultation on what best in class is for an electrical contractor in this geo at this segment size who specializes in this scope. We're going to go to associations and lean on them for that kind of guidance. But I don't think that there's a clear lighthouse beacon that does that for you, Jonathan. And I think that's going to emerge as you guys as a community, or as we all as a community start to come together and say, hey, look what these integrations do. Look what these point solutions do. Here's the great mix if you want supply chain management, from QR coding on Connex containers coming from China. And those will start to bubble up. Some will come and go, but I think that's spot on. Greg, you look like you're...
I want to pivot. So we got, what we heard is, high expectation. The cost sometimes is high to integrating softwares. We talked about, owners are looking projects from facilities perspectives. We talked about the systems aren't talking. We want to fit in everything in one platform, but some owners are open to have it. Now let's talk about how do we change the process? Like, how do we incentivize the culture? We have enough of the problems the last 20 minutes discussing why it is happening. We have a very less productivity increase. Let's spend time on how do we build data integrity. The purpose of this, Progress Coalition is to bring teams together. So what are your thoughts on that, Greg?
I'd be curious to hear if anyone has, on that note, what has worked for you? Because we just talked about the pains, but are there any processes are there lessons learned people have had that they'd be willing to share?
Just from maybe like an integration standpoint or just any process?
I would say I think like the whole conversation seems to be all around effectively eliminating information bottlenecks. So like Greg's like, I have 3 locations, but I don't know where to find the information in one of those locations, so it's not as useful. Or on the other side, it's like, that's like you viewing the information. The other side is the admin getting the information in there. So maybe it is a problem that they have 4 locations to pull it in because they're copying and pasting. So anything in that information bottleneck flow.
Sure. So one of our customers has been using the connector that we have with Procore for a few months. And he was detailing the process beforehand and how it was a nightmare when he was working with the contractor. At the end of each phase of the project, he was having to do like this nightmare process where he would have to download the items separately and then upload them into Newforma. He said it was taking upwards of about 3 to 5 days just to make sure that it was all imported correctly. And so he, as the architect, was having to pull this from the general contractor, and he is like, I'm the one who should, I should be owning the data. So with this, with the connector, there's a few benefits that, and I think the biggest one is that you can keep working in your solution and you don't have to have that technology curve to adopt a new one. I kind of grew up in the age where like I had just technology just fall into my hands, but even now I kind of get a little nervous about learning something new because there's just always a curve. And I think especially with construction technology, the point is that you need to get your project done. You need to meet deadlines. You don't want to have to spend time worrying about learning a new piece of technology. So that to me is, I think, the biggest benefit for people is just being able to get your job done.
Yeah, I think a big lesson learned from the, just say from the owner data perspective is not to wait to the end of the project. I think we learned a lot at Penn State by going closer to whenever your submittals are complete. That's when it's a good time to start looking at owner data systems. So if you do have owners that do want to take advantage of, facility management, integration, that's a great time. You still have everybody on board on your project that is available, still has time, and ultimately they haven't blown their budget at that point in time. So it's not just throwing it over the fence. It's a great time to focus on those turnovers. So we call that, we do data commissioning about 50% of the halfway through the construction process, and that's been an eye opener for us, and people are attentive to it, and it works really well.
I kind of agree with that's also our experience. You wait till like 90% completion, almost everybody has ran out of time and money, and there's no interest left in making sure the handover process is actually streamlined, which basically ends up being, the owner inheriting the mess and having to spend additional time and resources trying to figure out what should have done during the process. What we have noticed is that, we're kind of like focusing on BEP, we are trying to make it as a requirement. Early on, we're also trying to talk to the owners and figure out what their needs are, what kind of asset information they're looking for. Is that just the metadata you're looking for, or is that also geometry component you would like to be interested in? What other things helped us is periodical as-built scans of the progress milestones. And then over time, when you get the final as-built, which is almost 95 to 100% complete, you just give that as in, as a part of your as-built handover, because then people can use those, especially in case of where you can provide virtual walkthroughs, you can use that to tag your assets. And that has helped a lot because like for, if you're working on a small building, that's not a problem. But if you're looking at like academic or, like infrastructure projects, you're looking at massive campuses and massive buildings and, things which are not that easy to identify and find. And that ends up being one of the pain points from the owner's perspective, to identify where my assets are. How do I find them? How do I know when the warranties are expiring? Is there a way for me to get the heads up? And especially like linking the data with geometry and then, turning that into some sort of easy to consume format, like an Excel. But, the information is linked with them. So there's a way for them to find out the location of the assets has been really a game changer. More and more of our clients are liking that. So, just simplify it, turn it into maybe like, clickable PDF from BIM with the asset data on it is also something we have tried and successfully implemented.
I think I like Greg's question in the chat. I think he should ask that question.
Yeah.
I don't want to miss that one.
Greg, your question is whether we have a data commissioning department. So we used to use facility engineers for that, and we found out how expensive it was. So we developed a reliability maintenance team that puts together maintenance plans for the university, and they do the data commissioning. And I forget who said that before, but whoever said, once it's in the system and more people use it, that's when it gets maintained. So once we get into our asset management system, that's their job, to get it built over and do the data commission at that integration. That's when we're going to maintain it. Once it's in our system and the data is usable, that's the best way to maintain information is to keep it up to date.
I think that's from a performance perspective, that's also one of the things I think that's the most important is use and audits of systems. One of the things that we found is not just intentional rollout of systems, especially with new technology, a new construct tech that you bring to the business, is a lot of times the initiative's rolled out and maybe it doesn't get the adoption rate that you've expected it to get. Maybe 60% of the business is not engaged in the technology, so it's not getting the connection that you need it to get, and so you're not using the full a full impact of the software, so you're not getting the output that you need. And so you have to do the audit. Who's engaged in the software? Is it getting the data that you need out of it? Are you doing not just the intentional rollout? And so the rollout, was it rolled out? Are you getting the impact that you need out of it? Was the education and the training provided? And then are you doing the double checks? Are you doing the audit internally of the staff on how well it's being retained into the business and then being retaught and then being produced within the structure of the company? Because a lot of that, I've rolled out a lot of software in construction companies and been shocked at how much of that is actually not used, and that's a big problem.
Everything you just said sounds really expensive, doesn't it?
Incredibly expensive.
Who's going to pay for all that?
Dan,
I only have enough money for the software. I don't have enough money for the training and the support and the enforcement and everything else.
And you have to, it has to be engaged, and it has to be continually worked on an ongoing basis. It's literally a process.
Well, I think that's the difference in the discussion between that's how you do it. But if it's just grindstone grit, that's digitization. That's just, creating more waste, right? I think it's where is that path of least resistance where it's actually easier to do the right thing, to go through the training, to do whatever, pretend everybody's a millennial.
But from a perspective of culture, from a leadership perspective, and being engaged with your team, and that's not just at the leadership level, that's from the engagement model throughout the entire team process, right? Are all stakeholders engaged in the model? Because everybody has to be using the tech. And what you find a lot of times is people aren't engaged in it. And if they're not using it, it's an expensive proposition for them not to be engaged in the model.
I want to hear Darren made a really good comment about analog can in many ways be very agile, and I agree with him, but I want to know what you mean by that.
Wow, you don't think you have enough time. No, it's just, that's one of the reasons people don't digitize. Paper is very tactile. Everybody can understand that. It's on my desk, it's on your desk. If it's on mine, it's mine to do. It's on your desk. But, I could leaf through that, pick a piece out and bring it over, scribble on it and give it to somebody else. Very nimble. Look at what construction does. It's like the Native Americans chasing buffalo on the Great Plains. Buffalo herd comes through, they're packed up and they're on the move. Construction is so fast paced. How many jobs do we know where the construction schedule is ahead of the design schedule because we don't have time? We don't have time to think. And to put in a digital system, you have to think of all those details. Think of like a scheduling. You got the waterfall scheduling method. You've got to plan everything out and everything needs to hit right on a T or it all falls apart and all that. And if it's too major, all of that scheduling effort is waste. Digital is the same thing. I've got to work all these details out. Where analog, I don't have all the details. I figure out as I go. And in construction in particular, we're very good at that. What do those guys do out in the field? Show me a problem. All right, I got an option. Get out of my way. Let me fix it. They're used to working that way. So I think it's an inherently difficult thing to do. COVID's shown us that, efficient supply chains are not very elastic. And so they're great when they work, but if anything goes wrong, the whole system collapses. And I think that's one reason, I can tell you a major stadium project going on right now. There's probably pipe buried in the ground there because it was fabricated twice or wrong. And why? Because it was easier and cheaper to have the waste in the shop than slow that project team down. It's just a tough thing. I mean, my manufacturing days, the rule of thumb we had in manufacturing was most manufacturers do not understand the complexity of their own business processes. And here we are, we're building a custom factory for one-time use every time with a new team. And when you have a construction schedule that leads design schedule, you don't have time to work out those details and figure that out and get efficient.
So
that's where I turn to the Hollywood model. I think the right answer is that Hollywood, sometimes the same crew on the same movie sequel does great, but sometimes you get that spark with new folks. But there is sort of like industry standards of how you approach making a movie. I think making a project, making a movie actually have a lot of similarities at the end of the day. But don't let me take the conversation over. So this is your conversation, Sid. Come on.
There's a few things. I think we got some use cases. I want to know more about what has worked. We have one integration, what data commission, start doing data commission earlier. Don't wait till the end. I want to hear more. How can we fix this problem? What are the other avenues?
We actually, I had a really good example with a job for Erie Insurance Company, where when we started collaboration, we were in a collaboration platform anyways. The facilities maintenance were part of it. And throughout coordination, facilities was always weighing in with additional items, and we did have to watch scope slip. But that real-time understanding of what we're doing during the coordination phases and even up through install, knowing in real time, having the facilities really know what we're doing, really did change the outcomes of almost everything. And all of it was recorded, and it does tie into a lot of what other people were saying, where we had it tied to the digital model. We had the best of all worlds in that. But I wanted to back away from that because that was like the highest tech that we did, where they did scan pretty much continually. And if it was more than 2 inches off of what you installed, you changed the model to match what was scanned if they approved it in the new location. They even made us change out individual fittings. It was sort of nightmarish in that way. But the other thing that we did that was really, really successful across a whole host of projects, not just one, was I used Bluebeam to put a skin over all of the other software. So I used links within Bluebeam to sort of hack it so that when you hit submittals, it didn't matter where I was holding them or where the other guy was holding them. It just went to submittals. And when you hit current model, it went to the current model, regardless of whether I had it in Navis or Revista or BIM 360. So what I noticed was Actually, this guy named Tim schooled me on it. He said, you need to stop changing software every job. It's freaking us out. So I changed software, but I skinned it in what's like a dashboard, basically a PDF with a bunch of freaking links, so that it looked the same to the guy in the field for more than one project in a row. And then behind the scenes, I changed the software within reason. And I had really good results. We had good adoption. And when we got away from doing that dashboard setup, people started to fall off because they were used to their question being a button on that screen. And they really didn't care how it was answered. They have a question. There's the button for submittal question. Hit the button for submittal question. Because I don't think the guys in the field particularly care what the marketing is on a piece of software or how many capabilities it has. It has to answer the question you have when you have that question. And if it can do it that consistently, they'll keep it throughout the project. Once you get a foreman, man, it's tough to get them to pivot off. Like if they're happy, you need to kind of go with that.
I love that one. I think the foreman is the most important position in construction. I always have. When I was running work, I built data centers, campuses, stadiums, you name it. I think the data center world is particularly keen on a lot of what you guys are talking about. Daniel, to your point, I think of the moment of need, and retention is based upon, information delivered at the moment of need is retained at 90%. This is basic psychology, right? 30% when not. Marketing data says you have to tell somebody something 7 times. That math doesn't add up. But the point is when you're delivering something to somebody when they need it, they're going to lean in and use it. They have to identify that it solves some problem for them. So if you're talking about structure and material ordering being easier for the field versus ERP backend connected data for your back office, whatever that is, those professionals will use it if they get value out of it, and it's easy. The data center point is, and even the Microsoft Silicon Valley campus I built was, data entry and utilization. And so you can put metadata into the model that incorporates assumptions on submittal. I could put catalog number, serial number. We were using Watson to predict light bulb changing in the building at model time. Be damned whatever we used in the submittal actual process. And it was identified as just a standard deviation away from what the plan was. But that information is being asked to be input into that model. So your team, Craig, going through and scraping and adding all of that is an expense that could be minimized if done at the origination of your planning. And so I think a lot of what the problem in pain connection is what are the tools that you can utilize when to minimize double entry or take advantage of the data that's being generated by the business, by the industry. And in supply chain management, that can be everything from a Wesco or a manufacturer, a distributor in the middle, somebody touching it pre-approval, pre-submittal, quoting at estimate time, building that stuff into estimate databases, and ensuring to the original question, which I think was, who owns the information, the format, right? And how do we control that at what stage? And the earlier you can go back and deliver that moment of need sooner in the process, I think everyone's going to benefit all the way down to Craig at the end.
Yeah, that jumps to actually back to the question, when it comes to data standardization or normalization, who should own the data dictionary? For Electri, it should be the members who are reading the research, or for Penn State, it should be the facility operators like Craig's team, or the building product manufacturers, not the architects or the person who's building it. What do you guys think on that? Standardization versus owning the data?
I think dollars.
Go ahead.
I think dollars drive decisions. I think if owners are paying engineers and architects to stipulate through specification that material will be selected on its inclusion of a format of metadata, will drive vendor selection, will drive vendors to start seeing that more in specs and start adopting what's being standard. If I had to go lobby somebody to say who's going to drive the data, I would start with the big owners. I'd start with Apple and Amazon and Google and say, hey, start writing in your specs that you will provide submittals in this format, this whatever. And if you can't, it's not just going to be a whatever PDFs will do. We're going to be serious about that because we are trying to operationalize that data all the way through maintenance, starting at model. My 2 cents.
How do you work that into the bid process? As a subcontractor, that sounds great, but I want the lowest bid. that metadata piece can be easily swept under the rug. Let's say, I mean, I can think of a couple products. Personally, I would pay twice as much because I can actually count on the dimensional accuracy of the product. But come bid time, if I'm being selected on the cheapest bid, the metadata is cheaper than the material.
Craig, you were saying?
Yeah, my comment was, I mean, from an owner perspective, absolutely, we should be driving, some level, but not everything. So, what I care about is maintainable assets for the university. So I'm going to drive whatever data set is going to get into my systems. I wish my systems were more of a standard setup, but unfortunately, Penn State is a legacy system. We use Maximal for asset management. We use Penn Bay Envision for space management. They don't talk to each other. So we have to, unfortunately, put some very detailed custom data sets together and rules around that for our subcontractors, contractors, and designers to conform to. And we do that, and we control it. We don't want to be in that business. I don't want to have to pay somebody, to validate information, but unfortunately, we're just not there yet where we can trust the systems to do it. I mean, we've tried a lot of things. We've tried model checkers. We've tried, even Excel on steroids. But it's still that human nature defined things, because we have to use it after we're done, and we're facility centric. We're not project centric. So when I look at a facility campus, I have 400 air handling units across the university, and I can use multiple different parts and pieces to maintain them. They're the same. So whenever I set up my system, I set it up as an air handling unit. I don't set it up as, necessarily it's the mechanical system for this building. So it's just a different mindset, and we have to drive that, but we also have to understand and appreciate how construction would standardize to be able to take advantage of that.
Darren, I used to be a subcontractor. Your comment resonates with me, right? The procurement, the owning, the standard. But I think you have to start somewhere and put the onus on the people that are sourcing that material to communicate what they can or cannot do. I would constantly run into products that were no longer being manufactured, and I have to go through that process of educating the engineer that the spec that you wrote 5 years ago isn't practical today. And yes, that's a burden that falls on me, but I just sort of nut up and say, hey, look, that's extra work I got to do to educate my client. And I think that's a value add, quite frankly, that I can position to say, hey, look, the reason you're going to use us over the competition is our relationship with the market, with these providers, and our ability to either facilitate that or inform against.
Yeah, I think that's accurate, but I think also having a good view of what is and isn't important to to everyone in the supply chain. From an owner's perspective, you're going to care what air handler I put in there. I don't think you really care what brand copper coupling I use to connect that copper pipe to, long as it meets a particular material spec. And the amount of hoops we jump through to specify to a detail things that don't matter. Now that's going to matter to me as a subcontractor because, it's a commodity. I've got pricing agreements. I've got manufacturability issues, installation issues, but the owner doesn't care, but yet, you got these big specs that have it's just a rigid process. I have to go back and educate the engineer why I want to use a different material to lower the cost of the facility. It just, I think we all need to get together a little bit more and just be more aware of what everyone's doing, what the value is, and for who, and then just be okay with, hey, long as you meet ASTM something, I don't care what manufacturer you get it from. It just needs to be certified to that. I don't need to pick the manufacturer of this thing. This other thing I really care about. I want to be involved in that process.
Yeah, Darren, to your point. Yeah, to your point is we may just specify something not to use because we've seen failures over multiple buildings. But absolutely, yeah, we should not get into means and methods for sure.
I don't want to go down this rabbit hole per se, but I do think that there's an important elephant in the room to address from a contract type engagement, right? A lump sum engagement compared to a lean model is going to completely change the conversation to be able to facilitate those sort of conversations, Darren, to say like, hey, what can we provide to drive price down and preserve quality, and have you trust that I'm not positioning a substitute to pocket more profit. I think there's a lot there in informed owners compared to, I won't say uninformed, but traditional methods. But yes, there needs to be a conversation as early as possible, I think, about quality and data, and what tools are going to allow you to capture both with elasticity in supply chain management.
And I think fundamentally that's what we're trying to accomplish, right? Is that technology stack, right? For all those things, procurement and ERP and MRP for material resource planning and all of the other stuff that comes with it. So and we can go down a rabbit hole with respect to all of the technical specs and level of design and whether it's 100 or 500 or whatever, but and who owns what. But I think fundamentally what we're trying to do is to drive efficiency and price and efficiency and lean out variability. And I think from a lean perspective, and really that's what we have a completely different business model as far as what top-down is and the way we build and what we're trying to do from a technology perspective. And one of the things we're really interested in this technology space and the stack is to produce that, right? A kind of a single source vertical that provides those technologies pieces that meets our vertical supply chain. And so how do we get those technology stacks to talk to each other to provide a single source engine that aligns up our supply chain that meets that space? And right now in the construction space, it doesn't exist. And so how do we get that so that it actually flows and meets those objectives? I mean, literally across the vertical, because at the end of the day, we're talking about tasks. Fundamentally, we're talking about tasks, right? Sequencing tasks. Whatever the metadata is that we assign to it and put it in, we're talking about executing sequential tasks and making those work. Because really everything flows from a task, a buildable task.
Daniel, I need to bring you into some of my discussions at Procore. I believe that the material management plan and supply chain management is going to start with tracking of that asset. Yep. And then that's a difficult term because some people think of asset like Craig does, or an actual piece of equipment. I tend to think of assets as the attributes against a piece of equipment. But being able to take something from a coordination standpoint, mapping it to contract drawing, right? And saying, hey, what are all the things I owe per contract? Voltage, ampacity, size, dimension, whatever those are. Assign them to that. Track it. Use it for QA/QC. Use it for turnover. And where across all of your tech stacks does that information live, where you can put it in at design and estimate instead of just something that takes so many dollars and hours and I've got a bucket for it? What if it was actually more descriptive than that? My estimate included an assumptive something. And that's where I think I want to get it. And that's a bridge far to go, but I think that's real value for subcontractors.
But fundamentally, all of these pieces, regardless of what we're doing in our individual spaces, whether it's mechanical, electrical, security, structural, civil, they all relate to a specific task that has to be built in the space at that time as we build.
Time is negotiable. I think it's part of the problem is, especially, that schedule can change on a dime and you can pivot on a dime. I wish I could control that, but I don't. I just, hey,
that's where lean construction comes into play. And that's where we as a team, as a building team, as not we as in this call, but as a building group, that team moves with that planning.
Keep in mind, my work is in a market that's predominantly GMP, where you're almost incentivized not to be efficient, which is just very, very frustrating. You've got a developer puts in a shell and core, and that team is separate and distinct than the TI. And the shell and core people could really help the TI, but you know what? We don't care. We're going to seal up that envelope and take down the cranes and move out because and the TI that's up to that client, and it's a different team. And it's like, wow,
that becomes really problematic for sure.
Right. I think it's 2 minutes left, so I want to kind of do a quick wrap. Great, thank you for everyone in this participation. My takeaways were a lot. the issues we discussed was, do we have the ability to operationalize my data with so many new technology coming at the lightning speed, but they don't integrate yet? There are a lot of systems, they're still not talking UI experience of the software. We talked about it's the expectation in construction that you have an IT company, you'll be able to do your integration, but it gets expensive for some users who have shared that. Some of the users said that, issues like it's okay to have many systems, but we want the software companies or technology companies to see us. We are facilities owners, and Penn State, for example, has many facilities. So if the data is not set up properly, not staged properly, we cannot function properly. And then we moved on to, what has worked. One of the use cases was about integration. She shared about the use case about Newforma and Procore, I believe, have to pull in data manually, and they're able to do it faster. There are software providers who are providing connectors now. It's getting more common. What I also heard from Greg and Aditi, they brought up a use case about, let's do commissioning faster. Let's not wait till the very, very end. Bring it sooner, 50%, 100%, and let's move on. So there was talk about BIM coordination. There was talks about, bringing the right data at the moment. Those were the key takeaways that I took from here. So thank you all. We'll meet in all the group session in a minute. See you there.
And I faked you out there, Sid, because I think the countdown, which I always forget how long I make it, I think it's got about 87 seconds. So if anyone has one final awesome nugget they want to share, you got 80 seconds. Otherwise, we'll see you in the general session.
Anybody? I think we covered.
No, just thank you, everybody. I thought this was fantastic. Appreciate everybody sharing, what you've got going on. Some people are not as open to share with what they're doing, what their pains or problems are, but I think a rising tide raises all ships. So.
Great discussions. I enjoyed it. I learned a lot.
Yeah, thanks everyone.
The tactics that we use in this course are tactics that were used in the military. I train professional fighters on the side, and we use them for training the fighters, but we've converted them into a corporate-friendly environment. And so there, in my opinion, there is no short term. It's being eyes and ears and letting them talk. But over the long term, it's about building the ability to train your brain to perform under pressure. That's
on that note. That was awesome. Chad, this is definitely the longest we've just gone, and I think everyone's just mesmerized. Anybody that came on midstream that was like, so you want me to put you in your breakout room? They're like, no, I'm good. I'm just going to stay here in mental health.